Imagine finding out the love of your life is cheating on you not with just anyone, but with someone you've welcomed into your home. This is my story of 41-year-old stay-at-home mom, betrayed by my husband and my son's girlfriend. What would you do in my shoes? Natalie had always thought of her life as ordinary yet beautiful. At 41, she embraced her role as a stay-at-home mom with pride, believing her efforts were the glue that kept her family together. She had spent years supporting Greg, her 45-year-old husband, as he built his career as an architect. Together, they had raised two wonderful children, Eric, a 19-year-old college sophomore, and Sophia, their bright and spirited 15-year-old daughter. Eric's girlfriend, Amy, had been a regular presence in their lives for the past 2 years. At 18, Amy was bubbly, charming, and seemingly devoted to Eric. She often joined them for family dinners, movie nights, and holiday celebrations. Natalie treated her like a member of the family, offering guidance and motherly affection. But lately, things felt off. Greg had been unusually guarded with his phone, his late-night work emails were becoming more frequent, and Amy's once warm demeanor had grown strangely overconfident. Natalie chalked it up to her own insecurities. After all, Greg loved her. Their marriage had weathered its share of challenges, but they always came through stronger. Or so she thought. That belief was about to be shattered in ways she never could have imagined. It was a quiet evening. Eric and Amy were out at a friend's house, and Sophia was upstairs working on a school project. Greg had gone to bed early, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter, a rare occurrence. Natalie was cleaning up after dinner when the screen lit up with a notification. She froze. It wasn't unusual for Greg to receive messages, but this one caught her eye. The preview read, "Can't wait to see you again." Her heart skipped a beat. Rationalizing it as a misunderstanding, she picked up the phone. What harm could it do? But as her finger hovered over the screen, a sinking feeling took hold. She opened the message thread, and the truth unraveled in front of her eyes. Dozens of texts exchanged between Greg and Amy, her son's girlfriend. At first, she tried to convince herself there had to be some mistake. But the intimate language, the suggestive photos, and the way they talked about her made it undeniable. Natalie's hands shook as she scrolled through messages mocking her weight, her personality, and even her parenting. She has no idea, Amy had written, followed by laughing emojis. Greg replied, "She never will. She's too busy playing house." The phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the counter. Natalie stood frozen in shock, her chest heaving as the enormity of the betrayal sank in. Her husband and the girl she had welcomed into her home had ripped her world apart. Natalie sat alone at the kitchen counter, staring at Greg's phone as if it were a ticking time bomb. A torrent of emotions surged through her: shock, anger, heartbreak, and humiliation. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. How could this have happened? Greg wasn't just her husband, he was her confidant, her partner in everything. And Amy? She was supposed to be like family, someone Natalie had welcomed into their lives without hesitation. Her mind replayed every moment she had spent with Amy, helping her pick out a dress for prom, sharing late-night talks, even baking birthday cakes together for Eric. Every memory felt tainted now, twisted by the knowledge of what Amy and Greg had been doing behind her back. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. The cruel words from their messages rang in her ears. "She's too busy playing house." Was that how Greg saw her? A naive homemaker, oblivious to his lies? Natalie clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just about the affair, it was the realization that the man she thought loved her didn't even respect her. As the hours crawled by, Natalie's initial heartbreak began to harden into something else: anger. But that anger was tempered by fear. What would happen if Eric found out? How would Sophia handle this? Natalie knew she had to stay calm for her children, but inside she was breaking. As the night wore on, Natalie forced herself to keep reading. The messages between Greg and Amy revealed a relationship that was more than just a fling. They were meeting in secret hotels, late-night drives, even in their own home while the rest of the family was away. Each message was a dagger, cutting deeper than the last. But the worst part wasn't the affair itself, it was the way they talked about her. Amy mocked Natalie openly, calling her pathetic and clueless. Greg joined in, laughing at Amy's jabs and adding his own cruel remarks. "She actually thinks I'm working late," he had written once. Another time, he joked about Natalie's cooking, calling it as bland as her personality. Natalie felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't the Greg she thought she knew. He had always been the first to compliment her cooking, the first to assure her she was beautiful when she felt insecure. Now those moments felt like lies, part of a facade he had maintained while betraying her behind her back. The messages revealed another horrifying detail: Amy had no remorse. In fact, she seemed to enjoy the power she had over both Greg and Eric. She bragged about how easy it was to manipulate Greg and joked about keeping him wrapped around her finger. Natalie's heartbreak deepened as she realized the extent of Amy's betrayal, not just as Eric's girlfriend, but as someone Natalie had trusted and treated like family. Natalie's mind raced. She wanted to scream, to confront Greg immediately, but she knew she couldn't act impulsively. Her children were still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to tear their family apart. Natalie barely slept that night. Her mind churned with questions she couldn't answer. Should she confront Greg immediately? Should she tell Eric about Amy's betrayal? And how could she protect Sophia from this growing chaos? Every time she thought about the messages she had read, her emotions oscillated between anger and heartbreak. She considered the fallout. If she stormed into Greg's home office and demanded answers, what would it solve? Would he lie? Would he twist the truth and make her doubt herself? The thought of him shifting the blame, or worse, denying everything, made her stomach churn. Then there was Eric. How would he feel when he learned that the girl he loved had betrayed him with his own father? Natalie decided she needed a plan. She spent hours online, researching advice on how to handle infidelity. She read stories of women who had rushed into confrontations and lost control of the narrative. These stories warned her to gather evidence, stay calm, and think strategically. Natalie began documenting everything: screenshots of the messages, dates, and even Greg's behavior over the past few months. But the hardest part was pretending everything was normal. The next morning, she packed lunches, smiled at Sophia, and waved Eric off to his part-time job. When Greg kissed her on the cheek before leaving for work, she clenched her jaw, suppressing the urge to scream. She was living in a house of lies, but for her children's sake, she needed to hold it together, at least for now. By mid-morning, Natalie knew she couldn't carry the weight of this betrayal alone. She picked up her phone and called Laura, her best friend since college. Laura had been by her side through thick and thin, and Natalie knew she could trust her with the truth. When Laura arrived at Natalie's house, she found her sitting at the kitchen table, Greg's phone in front of her, and tear-streaked tissues scattered around. Laura's eyes widened in shock as Natalie recounted everything: the texts, the photos, the cruel messages about her, and the affair with Amy. "Nat, this is beyond disgusting," Laura said, her voice trembling with anger. "How could he do this to you? And with Eric's girlfriend of all people? You don't deserve this." Laura's outrage gave Natalie a glimmer of strength. For the first time since the discovery, she felt seen and supported. Laura encouraged her to take decisive action, but reminded her to think carefully about her next steps. "You need to protect yourself and the kids," Laura said. "Talk to a lawyer, document everything, and when you're ready, confront him on your terms, not his." That conversation was a turning point for Natalie. She wasn't just a victim of Greg's betrayal, she was a mother and a woman who needed to fight for her family's future. Laura's support gave her the clarity she needed to take the next steps, even if they terrified her. The confrontation came sooner than Natalie had planned. That evening, Greg walked into the house, cheerful and oblivious. He greeted Natalie with a kiss on the cheek, but she stepped back, her expression cold and resolute. "Greg," she said, her voice firm but controlled, "we need to talk. Now." Greg's smile faltered. He followed her into the living room, where she had Greg's phone resting on the coffee table, the incriminating messages open on the screen. She gestured to the phone and locked eyes with him. "Explain this." Greg's face turned pale. He reached for the phone, but Natalie snatched it away. "Don't bother denying it," she said sharply. "I've seen everything. The texts, the photos, the insults. All of it." At first, Greg tried to deny it, stumbling over his words. But when Natalie stood her ground, he shifted tactics, attempting to deflect the blame. "You've been so distant lately," he said, his voice defensive. "You don't understand how hard it is to feel appreciated." Natalie's blood boiled. "Distant? I've spent years holding this family together while you built your career. I've sacrificed everything for you, Greg. And this is how you repay me? By sleeping with our son's girlfriend? By mocking me behind my back?" Greg looked away, guilt etched across his face, but Natalie wasn't finished. "You betrayed me, Greg. You didn't just cheat, you tore this family apart. Do you even understand what this will do to Eric?" For the first time, Greg seemed to grasp the magnitude of his actions. He mumbled an apology, but it was too little, too late. Natalie didn't want his excuses. She wanted accountability. "You need to leave," she said finally, her voice trembling with both anger and heartbreak. "I need time to figure out what's next for me and for the kids. But you don't belong in this house anymore." The hardest part of Natalie's ordeal came the next morning. She knew she couldn't keep this secret from Eric, but how could she possibly tell him that his father and girlfriend had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable? She asked Eric to sit with her in the living room while Sophia was out with friends. Eric noticed her somber expression and furrowed his brow. "Mom, what's wrong?" Natalie's throat tightened. She took a deep breath and met his gaze. "Eric, I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt. But you deserve to know the truth." She explained everything as gently as she could: how she had discovered Greg's affair, who it was with, and the extent of their betrayal. Eric's face shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, to devastation. "Amy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "With Dad." Natalie reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing up abruptly. "How could he do this? How could she do this?" he shouted, pacing the room. "I loved her, Mom. And Dad. He was supposed to be my role model." Eric's pain was raw and palpable, and it broke Natalie's heart to see her son so shattered. She tried to comfort him, but he stormed out of the house, saying he needed space. Natalie let him go, knowing he needed time to process the betrayal. Sophia overheard part of the conversation when she returned home and demanded answers. Natalie told her a gentler version of the truth, careful not to overwhelm her young mind. Sophia clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "How could Dad do this to us?" she asked. Natalie didn't have an answer. The family was fractured, but Natalie vowed to do everything she could to hold her children together, even as Greg's actions threatened to tear them apart. In the days following the confrontation, Natalie felt like she was living in the eye of a storm. The house was eerily quiet, filled with the tension of unresolved pain. Greg had packed a bag and left after their fight, staying with a friend. Eric had barely come home, opting to stay at a dorm on campus, and Sophia was withdrawn, spending most of her time in her room. Natalie felt the crushing weight of holding everything together. The betrayal wasn't just about her marriage, it was about the family she had worked so hard to build. Each night she lay awake, thinking of how to mend what was broken, or if it was even possible. One afternoon, she decided to take a step toward healing. She sat Sophia down for a heart-to-heart. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice gentle, "I know this is hard, and I'm so sorry you're going through this. But I need you to know that none of this is your fault. And no matter what happens, I'm here for you." Sophia nodded through her tears, leaning into her mother for comfort. "I just don't understand why Dad would do this," she said. Natalie didn't have an easy answer, but she promised Sophia that they would get through it together. Reaching out to Eric was harder. He avoided Natalie's calls at first, but after a few days he finally agreed to meet her for coffee. When they sat down, the pain in his eyes was evident. "Mom, I don't know how to deal with this," he admitted. "I feel betrayed by both of them. Amy was my first real love, and Dad. He was supposed to be better than this." Natalie reached across the table, taking his hand. "I know, Eric. I feel the same way. But we can't let their actions define us. We have to focus on healing for ourselves and for Sophia. Eric nodded slowly, and though the path forward was still uncertain, Natalie felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't completely broken. Not yet. Natalie knew that healing wouldn't come overnight, but she was determined to reclaim her life. The first step was meeting with a lawyer. Sitting in the Stark office, she laid out everything: Greg's infidelity, the impact on their children, and her fears about what the future would hold. The lawyer listened carefully, reassuring her that she had options and a strong case for protecting herself and her kids. Next, Natalie turned to therapy, both for herself and her children. She found a counselor who specialized in family trauma, and though the first few sessions were emotionally exhausting, they were also cathartic. Natalie learned to navigate her feelings of betrayal and loss, while Eric and Sophia began to express their own pain in a safe space. Meanwhile, Greg tried to reach out. He sent Natalie texts apologizing and asking for a chance to explain. He even showed up unannounced one day, but Natalie stood her ground. "I'm not ready to talk," she told him firmly. "Right now, my priority is the kids and myself." Slowly but surely, Natalie began to rebuild. She found part-time work at a local bookstore, something she had always dreamed of doing. The routine gave her a sense of purpose and independence, helping her regain the confidence Greg's betrayal had shaken. As weeks turned into months, the cracks in their family began to heal. Eric returned home more often, finding solace in family dinners and quiet conversations with Natalie. Sophia grew stronger, leaning on her mom and even finding the courage to confront Greg about his actions. In time, Natalie realized that while Greg's betrayal had devastated her, it hadn't defined her. She was still a loving mother, a capable woman, and someone worthy of respect. Thank you for joining me as I shared this deeply personal journey. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories that dive into life's challenges and triumphs. Your support means the world to me. See you next time.